program, which is part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I will be right back. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully you heard that intro because it looked like the stream went live a little bit late. But today I'm going to be looking at the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. And that is one of the programs that has a Notice of Funding Opportunity that's been released. I've already looked, I did kind of a quick review of the BEAD program. That's the Broadband Equity Deployment and Access Program. Then you've got the Middle Mile program. I looked at that. And then today I'm going to be looking at the planning portion of the digital equity, which is 60 or so million, but there's kind of several pieces of that I want to look at. So let's take a look at that real quick. So this is the Digital Equity Act programs. You see this is on Internet for All. This is a new website that the NTIA has put together. And here they talk about the three different portions of that. So there's the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. That's what we'll be looking at today, and that's where we have a NOFO out, a Notice of Funding Opportunity. So this is grants for planning on how you're going to do your digital equity kinds of programs. So this is stuff to help you plan, and then you got to execute through these other programs here, State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program and State Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. So it's a little bit confusing, and hopefully this will become more clear to me as we get these other Notice of Funding Opportunities out and maybe see some additional things, but a little confusing. But I'm going to be going through this one today. So we're going to look at this NOFO and just do a kind of a quick review like I've done in these others. I'm just going to go over the highlights. So we've got Notice of Funding Opportunity, again, State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. There's an executive summary here, what it is, key dates. So this one, if you want to apply for this, you can apply by July 12th, 2022, although the letter of intent, I believe, is due in just a few days because it was like 14 days, and I'm assuming that's business days. It's been like 10 days since the NOFO came out, so we'll look at that. Complete applications from states, including 50 states, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, must be received no later than 11:59 on Eastern Daylight Time on July 12th. Application submission address for states, like the other NOFOs, this has to be done through the online portal, the NTIA portal. Now, if you're a tribal entity, or if you are a territory, there are other options for submitting your letter of intent, for example, which I'll show you here shortly. Funding opportunity description, won't go through all of that, but that's basically a couple of paragraphs on that. Funding instrument, grants, grant for states, grant cooperative agreement or contract for territories or possessions or tribal entities. Excuse me. Eligibility, each state is eligible to apply for grants under this program separately. Territories or possessions of the U.S. not defined as states for the purpose of the program, as well as Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, Native Hawaiian organizations are eligible to enter into grants, cooperative agreements, or contracts with NTIA. The anticipated amounts, grant awards to states are formula-based. The total amount appropriated by Congress for the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program, including administrative costs, is $60 million. So it's a little bit less with the administrative add. I think it was like 50, was it 53 million? We'll still might see it in here. And then the total amount appropriated for state digital equity capacity grants in fiscal year 2022 is $240 million. So that, I believe those capacity grants are over 5 years. Cost sharing and matching. This program does not contain a statutory non-federal cost sharing or matching of funds requirements. So BEAD has a 25% minimum on matching. Middle Mile has a 30% minimum on matching. In BEAD, there's nothing in there that says there's no. I think there might be something in there that says that states should give priority to people that want to provide a higher match for BEAD. In the Middle Mile, there's definitely incentive because actually, as the NTIA rates those applications, they're going to rate ones higher that are offering a higher match up to over 50%, gets the most number of points as far as the rating goes. So, but here there's no match at all. Got your table of contents. This is the background on what it is. All of that stuff we can skip. Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, so it's BEAD. NTIA strongly encourages states and territories to concurrently participate in the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program and the BEAD program. So BEAD, the E in BEAD is equity. So it's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. So there are, one of the things that you need to do when you're putting your 5-year plan together on BEAD is talk about how you're going to improve digital equity and access as you take that $42.45 billion. That's part of what you need to be doing, is looking at digital equity. Well, if you're going to be doing that in BEAD, you might as well apply for this as well and get your planning grants and get money for digital equity as well. So, and they're saying you should really do that. And if you do, you need to make sure that you coordinate this program with the BEAD program. States and territories should take a holistic approach to developing their BEAD 5-year action plans and their state digital equity plans, recognizing that they have a unified objective for closing the digital divide. Specifically, NTIA expects that the 5-year action plans and initial proposals developed for BEAD will fully incorporate the state or territory's digital equity plan. So again, as you develop your plan for this, I'm assuming you'd be participating in BEAD. If you're a state, for example, then you need to be working together, those two programs together. Each state and territory should therefore ensure that those tasked with developing the state digital equity plan, the 5-year action plan, that would be for BEAD, and the initial and final proposals for BEAD, the BEAD program, are working closely to meet the program's shared objectives. There's some definitions in here that are similar to the other ones that we've looked at. Here, the administrating entity for this program, the entity selected by the governor or equivalent official of each state to administer the Digital Equity Act plan and grant and capacity programs. Some other, what else do we have in here? It talks about them, that, aging individual. Again, I take offense at the fact that is anybody over 60 years of age. I guess they don't say aged individuals, because really, aren't we all aging? We are all aging, right? So that makes me feel a little better. Covered household. Covered household means the income of which for the most recently completed year is not more than 150% of an amount equal to the poverty level. That's a little bit lower, I think, than what I've seen the threshold on the other programs where it talks about not covered households, but what would be applicable for low income, for example. I think it's usually 200%, so this mentions 150% here. And it talks about covered populations. Again, these are the various types of groups that would be in a covered household or a covered population as far as being able to apply, or what they should be considering maybe having less digital equity because of the situation that they're in, including us aging individuals. Individuals who live in covered households, obviously, and that would be the poverty kind of households. Incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, language barrier, those who are English learners or have low levels of literacy, those in a racial or ethnic minority group, and individuals who primarily reside in rural areas. So that's a whole lot of people that this could apply to. Digital equity. The term digital equity means the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. And then they mention digital inclusion. And I honestly have a hard time figuring out what the difference here is, but digital inclusion means the activities that are necessary to ensure that all individuals in the United States have access to and the use of affordable information and communication technologies. Then it breaks it down, so maybe this is more general and this is more specific as far as the activities. So you've got, do people have access to reliable internet and the devices they need and the applications and content designed to allow them to use the internet? Includes obtaining access to digital literacy training, quality tech support, obtaining basic awareness of the measures to ensure online privacy, security, etc. So making sure people are digitally literate, they have access to broadband, have access to the equipment they need. And digital literacy here is meaning the skills. That's training, kind of meaning the skills associated with using the internet. Got disabilities. Eligible state, talked about that. Indian tribes, rural areas, talks about the different thresholds for rural areas, number of inhabitants, veterans, those kinds of things. So it defines those things. Federal award information and funding availability, 53 million. So that's that takes out the administrative costs. So they'll make up to 53.4 million available under this this particular program, not less than 5% of the amounts made available in a fiscal year to award grants to or enter into contracts or cooperative agreements with Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, and Native Hawaiian organizations. And the NTIA is supposed to direct not less than 1% of the total made available to award grants to or enter into contracts or cooperative agreements with the United States, Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and any other territories or possession of the U.S. So basically, what they're saying is they're, out of this amount, this 53.4 million, not less than 5% goes to the tribal entities, and then less than 1% goes to U.S. territories. NTI strongly urges all states, U.S. territories and possessions, Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, etc., to complete applications or letters of intent as appropriate and begin developing their state digital equity plans. The project award period, 1 year, beginning on the date on which the grantee is awarded the grant funds. So that's how long you have to do all of this. Allocation of award amounts. Statutory formula mandates. The amount awarded to each eligible state will be calculated by applying a formula in which 50% of the total grant amount shall be based on the population of each state in proportion to the total population of all eligible states. 25% of the total grant shall be based on the number of individuals in each state who are members of the covered populations. And I believe that was just the income-related population. I don't think that had to do with other categories, I don't think. And then in proportion to the total number of individuals in all eligible states who are members of covered populations. And 25% shall be based on the comparative lack of availability and adoption of broadband in each state relative to all eligible states. So basically, again, they're looking at all states and how your state would compare in these particular areas, and then they divide it up to 50, 25, and 25 based on these categories here. Let's see what else we got. Tentative award. So they've already come up with some tentative award allocations, I believe, based on data that the NTI already had on some of these numbers. So this can be challenged later, but they've already come out and said, well, based on what we know on their data that they've collected from, they've got pretty good data already. This is not based on any FCC data as far as where services are, but it's based on things like income levels, and they do have a good general idea of percentages of unserved and underserved based on, like large numbers based on the data they have. So not really specific, but so you can see here they've got different amounts per state. So you've got Alabama, almost 1 million. You've got Arizona, a little over 1 million. California, a big state, 4 million. Let's see, my state, Georgia, 1.4 million approximately. Hawaii, a little over 5 million. So you can see 500 million. You can see the various differences here in the states. Where's the low state? That might be Hawaii. 527, South Dakota. Places where you have fewer people, obviously, where you've got a lot of people, like California, you're going to have a higher amount. Of course, Hawaii, you've got a good number of people in Hawaii. It's 570 million. So you can see the differences here. And then challenge process. The state may challenge the amount allocated to it as determined by the funding formula. So again, those were the preliminary numbers, and then the formula will come out, and then you can still challenge that. You can do that by submitting a letter. Well, I think that challenge process probably relates to these numbers, these tentative numbers, because it says the state may challenge the amount allocated to it as determined by the funding formula. You have to submit a letter to the Assistant Secretary signed by the governor or equivalent official within 14 calendar days of publication of this NOFO. Well, publication of this NOFO was on May 13th, I believe, and it is today the 23rd. Is that right? So it's been like 10 business days. So it says 14 calendar days. So that might be today. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. So hopefully people that are doing this have already looked at this portion of things. Let's see what else we got. Content and form of applications or letters of intent. Applications for the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program must be completed and must adhere to the instructions provided in this NOFO, must be submitted in the format requested in the application portal. So for states, you've got to do everything through the application portal as you do with the other programs that I've talked about, the BEAD and the middle mile. U.S. territories and possessions other than Puerto Rico, Indian tribes, Alaska Natives entities, and Native Hawaiian organizations must submit a letter of intent through the application portal or through alternative means as specified below. So they give you a couple of other ways to do that if you're not a state, if you're a territory or tribal entity. So for U.S. territories and possessions, again, July 12th through the portal, or if submitted by mail or courier postmarked by 11:59. So basically it could be email. Here it is. So it could be email or portal, go through the portal, or you can send in by mail or courier, but it's got to be postmarked by that same time, or at least that same date, which would be the same time, I guess. So you've got to like just before midnight. So it's got to be on July 12th. Got to be postmarked for July 12th. States application requirements, description of the entity, certification from the state that not later than 1 year after the date on which the Assistant Secretary awards a planning grant, they shall develop a state digital equity plan. Because again, this money is for developing your plan. So basically within that year, you've got to develop your plan. A narrative describing the grant project and activities, detailed budget and budget narrative, and there's specific information about that in here. U.S. territories and possessions as far as their letter of intent. Again, the territories and possessions that wish to develop their own digital equity plan shall each submit a letter of intent to the Assistant Secretary signed by the territory or possessions governor or equivalent official. And again, they can go through either the portal, email, or mail by courier, mail or courier. And they have to have that postmarked or in those systems by July 12th. Same thing for Indian tribes. NTI will divide up the available funds from the set aside evenly among each tribal organization up to the max of $150,000 each. Allowable and unallowable uses of state digital equity planning grant funds. It says generally to develop the state digital equity plan, that's what you'd be doing, and to make subgrants to any of the following entities to assist in the development of state digital equity plan of the state. So these are eligible uses, and then you can see the entities that you could make subgrants to, anchor institutions, municipal governments, county governments, local education agencies. You can actually subgrant to tribal entities, nonprofits, organizations that represent individuals with disabilities, aging individuals, individuals with language barriers, including those who are English learners, low levels of literacy. It's a lot of the same things we looked at before, veterans, civil rights, entities that carry out workforce development programs, agencies of the state that are responsible for administrating or supervising adult education and literacy activities, public housing, and a partnership between any of these entities above. State digital equity planning requirements, statutory requirements. You have to identify, for example, any barriers that you've got, your measurable objectives. There's some information on that. How the measurable objectives will impact and interact with your state as far as economic workforce, educational outcomes, health outcomes, those kinds of things. How the state plans to collaborate with key stakeholders. That's very important in all of these things. It seems that the NTI wants to know. They want to know as you submit your 5-year plan, or in this case, your plan for this, how you have interacted with the stakeholders where this would be important, and that in both cases with BEAD and with this, a lot of times they're the same group. So that's again why they want you to coordinate. So because a lot of it is wrapped around equity in addition to making sure everybody has access. So you need to make sure that you are clear on how you've collaborated with key stakeholders, and it mentions who that might include. And again, it's these same groups that we just talked about. Additional requirements, stated vision for digital equity. Digital equity access or digital equity needs assessment. So you got to see what the lay of the land looks like before you start, the baseline, and then identification of any barriers. An asset inventory, including current resources, programs, and strategies, what you have to work with right now, in other words. Coordination and outreach strategy. Again, how are you coordinating and outreaching or reaching out to the community and to the stakeholders? Description of how municipal, regional, and/or tribal digital equity plans will be incorporated into the state digital equity plan. So it could be, as you are working on this, that you've got local municipals, regionals, and tribal entities that are working on their own plans, and you need to incorporate those or their feedback. Implementation strategy, how that strategy addresses the gaps that you've got, how your state intends to accomplish the implementation strategy, timeline for the implementation of the plan. But again, you basically got a year to do it. But maybe that's got some milestones and what you're going to be doing over that time. A description of how the state will coordinate its use of state digital equity capacity grant funding and its use of any funds it receives in connection with the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, other federal or private digital equity funding. So again, coordinating with other federal funds, especially BEAD. Make sure that that's all coordinated. Prohibited uses of state digital equity planning grant funds, prohibition on supplanting. This money shall supplement and not supplant other federal or state funds. Prohibition on profit or fees, so you can't be charging somebody or making a profit off of this activity. Prohibition on the use of grant funds to support or oppose collective bargaining. That is not allowed. And is that it? Thought there was something else. Maybe not. Let me scroll down a little further here. Yeah, I think that, yeah, I would have not had gone that far. I thought I put a line in here. I probably just missed it. Yeah, there it is. There's a little blue line to tell me it's time to stop. So, I think that's the highlights on this. So this, this will be interesting because, it'll be very easy to kind of track where funds are going when you're putting fiber in the ground. People are building out infrastructure. There's going to be measurable results. It's going to be much easier to plan. This one is a little bit more nebulous to me, these digital equity plans, and how this money is going to be used. So there's a lot of requirements in here for how you document that, and hopefully the federal government will go back and make sure that any money spent here is being used properly, number one, and being used efficiently. But again, it's a little bit easier to measure that and track that when we're talking about broadband deployment, is what I meant to say. So when you're engineering a broadband network, and when you are putting it in the ground and you've got your measurable results, and it's like, okay, well, we said we were going to do this, and now we have broadband up and people are getting these speeds, and then there's testing and making sure all that's working versus, how are we doing digital equity wise? So we'll have to see how that goes. So I've got a question here. Will all 50 states participate though? Yeah, I would expect all 50 states to participate. I think as far as BEAD, I think 37 or so states have already applied, or excuse me, have already put in their letter of intent for that program. Now this letter of intent, is this the one? I guess that was the challenge that needed to be in by 14 days after. So they've got until July to do this as well. I would expect all 50 states to participate in this. And one reason is because BEAD already has this digital equity requirement in it. Then I would think that the states are all going to want to get their BEAD money, and because of that, I think they're all going to want to go ahead and get this money, because this will help supplement the money from BEAD on what they're planning grants and then doing digital equity kinds of projects that will help them meet their goals for digital equity as part of BEAD. So yes, I would expect them to do that. That's a good question though. Thanks. So thanks for joining me. If this was helpful, if you would give me a like on the video. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. And I'm live every day with broadband deployment news, except Tuesdays when I'm doing Tech Tuesday, which is at 3 o'clock. So tomorrow's Tech Tuesday will be a continuation of my series on our TrueVision diagnostic software. Specifically, I'm covering the fiber diagnostics in that application. It's also a DOCSIS diagnostics application as well, but I'm covering fiber since that's very relevant with all of the money that's coming out. A lot of that's going towards fiber. There's not, some folks are going to be using it for cable services, but those are already existing cable operators. We're going to be seeing lots of new fiber operators out there, and we're going to be seeing cable operators that are using some of those funds to deploy fiber to the home in greenfield areas. So join me for that tomorrow at 3, or otherwise you will see me live at various times during the day for broadband deployment news. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.